just tipped his hand. And I would gotta, if I'm being have to be honest, tipping his hand at this point, you know, it's one of those things of it's a secret, but if everybody knows it, is it really a secret? It's like this difference between something being explicit and implicit. I came across this tweet by one Miss Tulsi Gabbard, and I appreciate this tweet, which is why I'm giving Tulsi this power pose in the background. It's full-throated. There's no hedge in it. It is perfectly and entirely clear on what her point of view is. It's about oil again. Bolton just exposed the real motive for intervention in Venezuela. We're in conversation with major oil companies now. It would make a difference if we could have American companies produce the oil in Venezuela. We both have a lot at stake here. Now, this is a congresswoman being very clear-cut in the position that she's taking. We are going into this country because we want to get our hands on their resources. Now, this goes against the media narrative that tries to say Maduro is a dictator. He's an authoritarian dictator. And in being an authoritarian dictator, he's preventing freedom and democracy in that country. And he's ruining the economy. And in doing so, we, the United States, who believes in freedom and justice, who's on the right side of history on all of these items, despite the fires that we've been setting in one country after the next, are going in to help the people of Venezuela by putting sanctions on the government that make it more difficult for the people of Venezuela. This is utter lunacy. It makes no sense. Not to mention you have stories of Mike Pompeo talking to opposition leaders. You have the stories of money being dumped into the opposition. And you have the opposition talking to Donald Trump, Mike Pompeo, John Bolton, essentially coming to agreement that if you say you're the president, we'll back you. You didn't run any race. You didn't win any election for the president. You didn't even run for president of the country of Venezuela. But we will pretend as if the elected government of that country, a government that has been elected over and over and over again, meaning before that Chavez, but on to Maduro, we will pretend as if the other guy is not there. That is utterly, entirely amazing. In two fronts. One, a hostile country, the United States, an opposition leader is working with an enemy of Venezuela to try to get power without going through an election in Venezuela. That's the first point. The overwhelming majority of Venezuelans don't want the United States choosing who it puts in that office. And even if you want to make the argument that Maduro has made mistakes, what is the justification for the United States standing on their throats? They want to get their hands on their access to the resources of Venezuela. Not to mention Bolton and some of these guys have ideological perspectives that it's a dominance thing. It's like, in one sense, it's this capitalistic aspect of trying to get their hands on the resources of other countries, something that we've been doing for the past, 50, 60, 70 years. Instituting coups just like this in very similar ways by spreading propaganda. And not just propaganda. In some cases, propaganda, yes, but also in some cases giving weapons and money and oil or whatever else to opposition groups that will go out and get violent, start setting shit on fire, beating people up, shooting people. And then when the government gives a response, the media ignores the fact that the opposition was doing this, ignores the fact that we were giving them money to do this, money and weapons to do this, and say that the government is killing protesters. It's like what they did in Syria. You have guys with beards and guns and knives, and these guys are out there essentially fighting government forces, and you ignore the fact that these guys are soldiers or proxy troops that are coming in from other countries, given weapons and resources us to do so. You ignore that. You just say the government is killing protesters. This, in this case, provokes a reaction from the United States saying, oh my God, we can't stand by with they kill protesters. We're going to send proxy troops in from other countries in order to go in and restore democratic order by breaking down and entirely reassembling democratic order to suit our interests. But, so I appreciate Tulsi's response. This is not wishy-washy. Sanders gave a wishy-washy response. Ro Khanna did not Rokana may have stiffed me in coming on to the show, but I appreciate the responses that he's been given on this. He's been full-throated. We are going into those countries to pilfer the resources of those countries that needs to be resisted. John Bolton, neocon, suspected porn star. It's because of the mustache. I always think porn stars have those mustaches. John Bolton is on Fox, a safe space, I suppose. And as he's in a safe space, I guess he thinks it's perfectly okay to spill his guts. And he does just that. Take a look at this.
We're looking at...
Let me flip this over.
We're looking at the oil...
There we are. There. This is what Tulsi Gabbard was talking about. And let's do it this way. And restart. Bam.
At the oil assets, that's the single most important income stream to the government of Venezuela. We're looking at what to do to that. We want everybody to know we're looking at all this very seriously. We don't want any American businesses or investors caught by surprise. They can see what President Trump did yesterday. We're following through on it.
So if you think of a company like Citgo, which is owned by PDVSA, which is the state-run oil company there in Venezuela, we have a lot of those Citgo assets right here in the U.S. Is that something, for example, sir, that you're looking at?
Yeah, look, we're in conversation with major American companies now that are either in Venezuela or, in the case of Citgo, here in the United States. I think we're trying to get to the same end result here. You know, Venezuela is one of the three countries I call the troika of tyranny. It'll make a big difference to the United States economically if we could have American oil companies really invest in and produce the oil capabilities in Venezuela. It'd be good for the people of Venezuela. It'd be good for the people of the United States. We both have a lot at stake here, making this come out the right way.
I gotta be honest, I don't know why that's okay. Like, this thought that you can go into another country and steal the resources of that country. This is, what, a national security advisor. And he's talking about business opportunities in another country, in a country that the United States has been essentially, you know, a predatory nation with its flunkies in other parts of Latin America, like Colombia. Not to mention the flunkies across the world in Europe. The truth of the matter is that the United States has been against the Venezuelan government because the Venezuelan government has not been under the thumb of the United States. That's what this boils down to. There are resources in Venezuela that the United States wants to get its hands onto. And yes, there may have been mismanagement, but let's be very clear that the United States jumped on the opportunity to go after them after that mismanagement and did everything necessary in order to keep that mismanagement from being resolved. I mean, ultimately, how dare you use the resources of your country for the people of your country? We need to get our hands on those resources. John Bolton kind of makes it very clear that one of the key things that he's doing here is we want American companies to exploit the resources of Venezuela. That's an amazing admission. And, you know, this is kind of what I mean when I said this in the open. This is not coded in the language of law and order in this case. Like there's a complete humanitarian crisis where there's a breakdown of the society. Well, in this case, we're actively causing the breakdown of the society. Those oil sanctions are going to cause even more chaos. The point in all that chaos was to create strife and chaos and havoc in the society itself, to eat at the popularity of the Maduro government and the Chavistas, in this case, for not being able to provide these things. Understand that opposition is in the pocket of the United States. Guaidó hasn't run for anything in this case, or at the very least hasn't run for office for the presidency. The opposition chose not to run for the presidency. I guess I'm trying to make the case that of all of the factors that are placed in here, it is an easy thing to understand that this is a coup in action. And if that's a coup in action, where the United States is just bringing a predator nation on this case, using sanctions, which are, let's be very clear, acts of war, we're restraining that nation from being that nation and getting access to the things that they need. It's, for all intents and purposes, an economic blockade. We're causing the troubles of the country, then saying, look at the troubles of the country. I'm just finding it to be amazing that this is taking place like this. Usually it's not this vulgar in the overtness of it. Let's see who's here. But shout out to Tulsi, shout out to Kana for being strong on this. It is appreciated. Let me see. Maybe I need to flip this. Come on, come on, come on, come on, come on. Coup is clandestine. This is an invasion. Yeah, yeah, but it's bizarre in the way that it's being run. I mean, usually the CIA go into a place, they pay opposition leaders, they find people who may be friends or not even friends, just people who will be willing to take their money in order to be an opposition group. The United States turns around and gives more vocal support to that opposition group, whether or not that group has support within the country or not. It's almost irrelevant. The goal at this point is to shape the media narrative, and the media narrative tends to run with what the government is saying on it, regardless of how, you know, how clearly necessary to challenge that narrative. It's not challenged. I mean, one war after the next, it's not challenged. And this is the same case. I mean, you can look back at some of the things that we've done in Latin American countries, with Bolivia, South America. I've said it multiple times. Bolivia, Brazil, Honduras, Guatemala, Chile, all of these countries where we've put in coups or put in strongmen, far-right guys, dictators, that we could interact with in order to get our hands on the resources of those countries, to use them at our behest in the company. And when I say our, I just mean the companies of the United States. And taking them from the people in those local areas. The techniques that are being used there are being used, that have been used during that time frame, are being used here. It's a travesty to some degree of American history, or the teaching of American history, that this is an episode that tends to be left out. Because if Americans can see that this stuff was happening before, at some case, when it happens again, there will be a little bit more context to say, oh, we're doing it again. Not as if this is something separate and distinct. The only difference with this one is that it is distinct. It is shocking and vulgar, and how it's just being clear and overt. This is not something happening 20 years later you find out. This is something happening that's now, in real time, where they are essentially economically blockading that country and consistently and continually threatening the country to cater to another country's will. I find this to be utterly amazing. Completely amazing. Danny Knapp, Nicolas Maduro posted a video on Facebook. I'll check it out. I'll check it out. If I'm not mistaken, that video was probably in response to hearing Bolton. I mean, he's not hiding it. Yes, we're going into the country, we're going to steal their resources. That's what we're going to do. Now, they're not going to call it theft. The reason they're not going to call it theft is because Guaida is going to be, at that point, the appointed person who the United States puts in office, and he's going to turn around and he's going to give favors to the United States. Just telling you what's going to happen. That's a theft of resources. They're not going to call it a theft of resources, but for that matter, they didn't even call this a coup. So, you know, let's be very clear on what we're talking about. All right, I'm going to end this because I have another video I want to do, and these can't be too long. If you enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe, and you can always support through PayPal or Patreon. Thanks all.